I'd like to call the meeting to order.
Shall I call the roll?
Took care of
Yes, please.
your other battle.
Alderman Rhodey. Alderman Kennedy.
Here.
Alderman Ballmer.
Present.
Alderman DeCaro.
Present.
Alderwoman Gracia.
Present.
Chairwoman Davis.
Present.
We have 5 present and we have a quorum.
Thank you. This morning, the Engrossment Rules, Resolutions, and Credentials Committee has been called to order to get a report of the draft, a draft report that we had on our agenda to be done to present to this body and the full board on the topic of creation of a racial equity lens. As most of you know, we've had a number of meetings, we've had input from one of the professionals in the industry here in the local area, as really all over the country. And so Mr. Khatib Waheed was very, very instrumental in bringing about some additional opportunities for the city to address this issue. So I'd like to turn it over to Alderman Kennedy to go over the report, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The report was trying to just capture what happened in the various hearings and then put forward what we discussed in the meeting with the recommendations. So it has those 3 basic parts. A review of the various meetings that the committee held in relationship to understanding what a racial equity lens is about. Then the actual findings, the points of significance that came out of those various meetings. And then the last part, which are the recommendations. Those are the basic 3 parts of a report. It's been some time since the committee has had a written report like this. And so these are usually the components of it. You could have added in one other portion, but I didn't really see the need for it. This is pretty straightforward. So I guess the main thing is that does it reflect what we said in our last meeting? I was really trying to capture all of that. So I actually looked over the recording of the meetings and did some direct quotes that came out of the, particularly with Khatib Waheed when he gave us the information about what a racial equity is about, and then from our director of the Civil Rights Enforcement Agency.
Absolutely.
So it is a draft, and so are we feeling that this is reflective of what we discussed and what we feel came out of that discussion? That really would be the question here today, if we have any alterations to it.
Well, I think that's most important, to make sure that we all feel that way on the committee, most especially, so that we can move forward with the full board and also with some of the recommendations. I did have an opportunity to review this very thoroughly, and I did read it again this morning. So I'm very pleased with what is the content of it. What I wanted to do was to have the opportunity for each one of the committee members to give their opinion on whether or not they believe this reflects what we have accomplished thus far. Are they comfortable with the recommendations? And then I also would like to ask, and I'm glad that he is present, I'd like to ask Mr. Bryson his opinion, because he's been supportive in our efforts thus far, and I think has provided a very strong first step in working with the executive body, and I'm looking forward to having a closer working relationship. So first, I'm going to call on our committee members, and Mr. Rhodey is excused today. He had some business he had to take care of. Alderman Kennedy has just reflected, and Alderman Ballmer, did you want to have some comments now?
Sure. It's scary when I'm this high in seniority, isn't it?
I know. We moved up so fast.
Only 14 years, I think. Now.
All right, now.
All right. I'm paging through it. I'd like to commend our brother from the 18th ward. He did a wonderful job here.
Oh,
yes.
This is, I know you're putting much more work than any of us are into this one, so I appreciate all that. As far as the recommendations and going through it, even in my semi-state of awake.
I understand.
But, and I like afternoon meetings. I get to bed at 3 in the morning. But no, I believe that with the recommendations, which is the most important what we're doing here today, so I have no problem with any of that whatsoever.
Well, thank you very much. Next is Alderman Vaccaro?
Yeah, I read through it, you had sent it, and I didn't see any issues,
Okay.
even though I told Charles I'd pick on him.
Well, you can still do that.
That's truly allowed
When do I show up?
and somewhat expected.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, Alderwoman Engracia?
The only question I had is, do we want to add a date with respect to when we think the board should be trained by, or do we want to leave it open-ended?
Yeah, if I may, I thought about that, but I did not want to try to.
Especially with
Kind of
election season
determine
coming up in
Yeah.
the spring.
So
I
that's.
mean, I feel like we have momentum, I just want to make sure that we don't lose
Mhm.
it, but if you're all comfortable with not having a date on it, I'm okay with that.
I am. One of the things I didn't put in there, the director of CREA did say that they were willing to work with us
Mhm.
on doing that, and they're working on the timetable.
Oh, yes.
And so our effort, I would think, would be to try to get into that timetable and take advantage of some of those experts, other experts that they're bringing in.
Right,
So I feel comfortable with that,
okay,
as opposed to putting a specific date.
okay, and thanks for sending it ahead of time, it was nice to be able to review it before it was sitting in front of us today.
Thank you.
I agree. I think I've given you my comments already. I'm very much pleased with the report. I do believe that the recommendations are some things that we really can accomplish. And with support from CREA, and as I shared with you, I've had an opportunity to speak with several of the institutions that are willing to support us if we need it. If we need facilities, if we need staff, those kinds of things to make sure that this happens. And they're very excited with Mr. Khatib Wahid. They have experienced his work before, and some of them are looking at even using it for themselves. So, Mr. Bryson, could you come to the table, please?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. I wanted to ask your opinion of the draft report, please.
First of all, thank you for allowing me to speak today. I think it certainly, I've been through probably all the meetings related to the racial equity conversation, and I can tell you this accurately reflects what has transpired, and I am certainly excited about the recommendations to hopefully go to the full board to have the Board of Aldermen be trained in racial equity, as well as, and I can tell you, you asked about a date, almost all, well, we are close now to 100 members of the, between directors, commissioners, and managers. We have close to 100 members of the mayor's team that will be trained on October 31st.
Okay.
So we are marching quickly to that. The only, I would say, slight concern that was sort of kind of addressed is we are under a timetable, and the reason why is not the election, but it is the fact that we would like to see how we can proceed in the next fiscal year, and for me, budget starts January 1.
Right.
So how can we get both the Board of Aldermen, if possible, current Board of Aldermen members, as well as the city departments, because if not, you're going to have two different conversations, and that's one of the things that we, that I'm keen of, having talked to other members of around the country around racial equity issues in various states and, I'm sorry, various cities and counties. They talked about the lockstep approach to helping racial equity, because if one person is having one type of conversation and one is having another, there's a little confusion there.
I do understand, and I appreciate that, that you have that in the forefront. So, the only other question I think I had of you was, how better can we work together? That's critical from you. I know you're doing some things, but is there something else that we could be doing?
I think there possibly could be some training related to where we are right now in terms of not just racial equity, but possibly disparities geographically that would could be done. put him on the spot, Don wrote, and could possibly work, and so we could probably work together and say, where are there inequities in delivery of service, and how might we better look at our budgeting process to affect that change?
Okay.
And so that would probably be my first reaction / suggestion, is how might we be able to use the various statistical ability that we have. I think an underused and under-discussed institution in city government is CSB. So where are the calls coming from? What type of calls are there? Might there be inequities in the delivery of service? Not in terms of somebody maliciously doing that, but when you have, and I shouldn't, but I will give one example. When you have a small time frame to do a particular job that is sort of set by budget, then that affects your performance.
Okay.
Instead of saying, I can't do this in 2 weeks, I need 3 weeks to get this particular job done. How does that affect, therefore, the delivery of service to the people in that particular neighborhood or geographic area? And so looking at not just the budget, but the policies, procedures, and practices that come from the budget, I think is something that we can certainly discuss.
I like that, and I'd like to add one more thing to that. Volunteerism. You see, when you're sitting at a government table, people don't think about that. But volunteerism can give you sometimes as much as 25 to 40% additional work to make a job be done cheaper and faster. And so partnering with entities that can provide us with those volunteer hours, and there's so many of them out there. And the reason I know, because I'm usually volunteering somewhere doing something. So there are a lot of people, and I'm not talking about just I want to do something, but I'm talking about skilled people as well, who are willing to volunteer their time if there's skilled things that need to be done as well. And so we need to look at how we empower this city with volunteerism and bring that closer to us.
I absolutely agree. Absolutely.
All right.
Can I ask him a question?
Yes, sir.
Are you recommending that we put a timetable on the training?
I think from the administrative branch, that would not be appropriate for me to make that recommendation. However, I do believe the sooner that we can get both entities trained, the better.
Okay.
If I could,
Yes,
so you're
sir.
saying you just need a plan as far as what this is, as far as setting your budget, as far as when meetings take place. Is that part of what you're saying, or maybe I'm missing? In other
Well,
words, you need a budget by January 1st to get something.
Well,
in order.
well, two things.
Okay.
First is, there is a specific budget for racial equity training. It costs, the group that we are using, it costs $10,000 per day. So all of our city departments are working together to make that happen. But I'm also looking at the upcoming budget conversation for the city of St. Louis, and how a racial equity lens, once both, I shouldn't say both sides, both the Board of Aldermen as well as the city administration learns that, then how does that change the conversation around service delivery and budgeting and line items for particular programs and services? So, on both accounts.
Thank you, ma'am.
You had a question?
I just have a quick question. When you were discussing inequities in delivery of services, I don't remember the entirety of the conversation we had with Julie Nelson, but I remember being struck by the fact that people are calling into CSB to make complaints, but the city's not proactively going into other places where calls aren't coming in. And there was a term for that. I can't remember what it is, but I think that is key.
Yes, and speaking with the CSB manager, Essence Owens, you can actually map out where calls are not coming from.
Yeah.
And then the question is, why aren't those calls
Mhm.
happening? Are people so beat down that I just don't want to call anymore? They haven't
Yep.
gotten the reaction that they wanted to out of city government? Or is it something else? And if there's something else, what else is it?
Right, okay,
Yes, absolutely.
thanks.
Interesting, okay. No more questions? Okay. So, I think we're at a point now where we can move forward. I think that if you have nothing else to share with us, then the committee should look at how adopting this draft. Okay?
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Alderman Kennedy, I'd like for you to wrap up on this, please. Did you have anything additional you need to say?
That, I certainly appreciate you calling the meeting, the committee being here and considering this. This is conceptual.
It
It's
is.
going to take a minute for people to wrap
It
their
is.
minds around it. So in presenting it to the full board, we have to help people understand this concept of a racial equity lens. And when we do so, committee members, feel free to chime in. And
Son, you're on your own.
Yeah.
And that I think we would certainly be endeavoring to try to make sure that the training happens before you begin that budget process. So whether we don't have to put it into the report, but certainly by January 1, it would be good if the board has had that kind of training.
I totally agree with you on that. I think it would be a good time to get this in before, because as you know, when January comes, then because it's an election cycle, nothing happens until after the end of April. And we really just don't need to go that long without it. So the chair is willing to accept a motion to adopt the draft report.
So moved.
Second?
It's been moved and second to adopt the draft report for the Resolution 207. Please call the roll.
Alderman Kennedy,
Aye.
Alderman Bulmer,
Aye.
Alderman Vaquero,
Aye.
Alderwoman Gracia,
Aye.
Chairwoman Davis.
Aye.
We have 5 ayes and 0 noes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time, the extra time that was put in for this, and most especially your extra time. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all
Thank
right,
you.
committee.
5 ayes and no no's. That's
Are we
really
adjourned?
I mean,
Yes, we are adjourned.